We usually think of Steam as the place we get our PC games, but what if its real defining moment, its actual impact, wasn't about selling games at all? What if Steam's true genius was the almost violent elegance it used to break the old system, shattering the tight grip publishers had on PC gaming, and, in doing so, accidentally unleashing this huge wave of creative freedom that basically rebirthed the medium? How did that demolition end up building the foundation for everything we have today? To really get what was broken and why that act was so significant, we first have to understand just how different, how much more rigid the world of PC gaming used to be. Forget instant downloads and libraries of thousands of titles, we need to talk about the old world. For a long time, if you were a PC gamer, your choices and even what got made were largely dictated by a handful of powerful entities. Think late 90s, early 2000s. Publishers weren't just funding games, they were the gatekeepers, the kingmakers. They decided which projects saw the light of day, often prioritizing sequels or licensed properties over riskier original IPs, controlled the marketing, and, crucially, owned the distribution channels. Imagine a unique title like, let's say, Planescape Torment. It's a text-heavy RPG. You're trying to get greenlit in an era focused on the next big 3D shooter. It's essentially impossible to get published. And those channels, they were almost exclusively physical. Games came in big, elaborate boxes. Think of the hefty packaging for titles like Baldur's Gate or Fallout, sold in brick-and-mortar stores like Electronics Boutique or CompUSA. Shelf space was king, meaning if your game didn't secure good placement or if a retailer decided to favor a competitor's blockbuster, your potential audience might never even see it, regardless of its quality. Retailers, in turn, held significant sway over what got prominence. This created an incredibly high barrier to entry. If you were an independent developer, no matter how brilliant your idea, getting your game into the hands of players was a monumental task. You had to convince a publisher to take a massive gamble to invest not just in development, but in manufacturing thousands of CDs or DVDs, printing manuals, designing boxes, and then wrestling for that precious limited retail shelf space. Creative control was often a secondary concern to market appeal, as dictated by the publisher's sales department. Innovation was risky, proven formulas were safe, it was a system that, by its very nature, favored the big players and often stifled the kind of diverse, sometimes niche creativity we take for granted today. So what kind of force, what quote-unquote elegant violence could possibly begin to break such a deeply rooted system and its control over PC gaming? The answer, as you've probably guessed, arrived not with a polite knock, but with the digital thud of a platform initially built out of necessity: Steam. Valve at the time was primarily known as the developer of Half-Life and Counter-Strike. With Half-Life 2 on the horizon, they faced the same distribution challenges as everyone else. Their solution, Steam, launched in 2003, wasn't initially conceived as the globe-spanning behemoth it is today. It was, in many ways, a pragmatic tool for Valve to update its own games and, crucially, to distribute Half-Life 2 directly to players. But this pragmatic tool was, in effect, the first significant crack in the old world's walls, by mandating Steam for one of the most anticipated PC games ever. Valve essentially forced a direct confrontation with the traditional model. Suddenly, for this one massive title, the physical retailers, the box manufacturers, the shipping companies, their absolute necessity was being challenged. And the industry, or at least a vocal part of the player base and some traditionalists, didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat. There was skepticism, outright hostility even, accusations of it being intrusive, DRM in disguise, an unnecessary hurdle. People were used to owning a physical box, a disc. This idea of a mandatory online client for a single-player game felt alien, even aggressive. But that aggression, that willingness to force a new model, was precisely the quote-unquote violent part of this elegant disruption. For Half-Life 2, Valve was effectively saying, "We don't need your old roads, we're building our own digital highway." This wasn't just a new piece of software, it was a declaration that the old way of doing things, the publisher-retailer chokehold, was no longer the only way, at least for them. It was the initial, forceful breaking of that chain. Steam had thrown the first stone, cracking the foundations of the old order. But how did this act of breaking, initially a tool for one company's flagship release, evolve into the catalyst for a widespread, democratized shift in power across the entire PC gaming landscape? This is where the elegance of Steam's disruption truly begins to shine, in how it systematically, almost methodically, started to empower a new generation of creators. True revolution, the kind that reshapes an entire landscape, needs more than just a single crack. It needs to fundamentally alter the power dynamics. It wasn't an overnight change. For its first few years, getting a third-party game onto Steam was still largely a curated affair, with Valve handpicking titles. But the potential was clear, and then came pivotal shifts. Steam Greenlight, introduced in 2012, was a major turning point. Before Greenlight, getting your game on Steam if you weren't a major publisher or a personal pick by Valve was incredibly difficult. Greenlight changed that dynamic. It was essentially a system where developers could submit their own game concepts, often with early builds or trailers, directly to the Steam community. Users could then browse these submissions and vote for the games they wanted to see officially released on the platform. If a game garnered enough community support, enough yes votes, Valve would then typically greenlight it, meaning it would be accepted for sale on Steam. Suddenly, there was a pathway, albeit a community-voted one, for independent developers to get their games onto this massive platform without needing the explicit blessing of a traditional publisher or even Valve's direct editorial nod. It put a degree of power into the hands of players to signal demand, and for developers, it offered a more transparent, if still competitive, route to market. It was messy, sure, with debates about popularity contests versus quality, and it had its own set of problems regarding discoverability and sometimes questionable submissions, but it was an undeniably significant transfer of gatekeeping power towards the community and the creators themselves. This eventually evolved into Steam Direct in 2017. It replaced the community voting system with a straightforward, recoupable submission fee for each game a developer wanted to publish. Essentially, if you had a finished game and paid the fee, which was intended to discourage a flood of very low quality or non-serious entries, you could get your game on Steam. This was a radical simplification. The gate wasn't just ajar anymore, it was practically wide open. Of course, this brought its own challenges, like the asset flip controversies and concerns about discoverability in an even more crowded marketplace. But the core principle was a further democratization. The barrier to entry was now primarily financial and technical, rather than subjective community opinion or direct publisher approval. The message was becoming clearer and louder. If you could make a game, Steam was increasingly and almost unconditionally willing to give you a storefront. And the impact? It was transformative. Suddenly, small teams, even solo developers working on passion projects in their bedrooms or garages, had a viable path to a global audience of millions. Titles that would have been laughed out of a traditional publisher's office for being too niche, too experimental, or too indie began to find not just an audience but significant commercial success. Think of the wave of innovative indie games that defined the late 2000s and early 2010s. Titles like the physics-based puzzler World of Goo with its unique art style and charming construction mechanics, or Braid, Jonathan Blow's time-bending platformer that was just as much a philosophical exploration as it was a game. These weren't just quirky side projects, they were critically acclaimed, award-winning experiences that captivated players and demonstrated the incredible creative potential brewing just beneath the surface regardless of the mainstream. Many of these found their footing, their audience, and their financial viability directly through Steam. This wasn't just about selling games, it was about Valve providing the infrastructure, the Steamworks SDK offering tools for achievements, multiplayer, cloud saves, that leveled the playing field in crucial ways. It was a systematic dismantling of the old dependencies. With developers newly empowered and traditional gatekeepers weakened, the creative floodgates began to open. But what did this breaking of the old structures and the rise of new creators actually build for the players and the culture of PC gaming itself? The result of this breaking wasn't just more games, it was the birth of something far more dynamic, a sprawling, interactive, Creative Commons, a true PC gaming renaissance. Before Steam's democratizing influence, the landscape, while often innovative, was still largely tethered to what major publishers deemed viable for mass-market physical distribution. Post-Steam, especially as its open-door policies solidified, we witnessed an explosion. Suddenly, genres that might have struggled for widespread attention found fertile ground. Hyper-specific simulators, deeply narrative-driven indie titles, experimental art games, brutally difficult roguelikes. The sheer variety was and continues to be staggering. This wasn't just about quantity, it was about a fundamental broadening of what a PC game could even be, a direct consequence of more diverse voices finally having a robust platform. But this renaissance wasn't just confined to the initial release of games. Steam cultivated an ecosystem that invited ongoing creation and interaction. Take the Steam Workshop. It transformed players from passive consumers into active co-creators, extending the lifespan of titles like CSGO or XCOM 2 for years with a constant stream of user-generated mods, new scenarios, and cosmetic items. This wasn't just a feature, it was a fundamental shift. Then there's early access, controversial at times, certainly, but it also pioneered a new model of game development, iterative, transparent, and often directly shaped by player feedback from the earliest stages. Games could launch in a raw state and evolve in public, with the community becoming an active, sometimes crucial, part of the development journey. Beyond the games themselves, Steam blossomed into a social hub. Its forums, user reviews, curator systems, and community groups fostered discussion, debate, and the formation of dedicated fan bases. It became more than a store, it was a digital public square where PC gaming culture was actively shaped and shared. This transformation into a bustling creative commons, this incredible flourishing of diversity and interaction, feels like a monumental achievement, a testament to some grand architectural vision. But here's where the narrative takes an interesting turn. Was this meticulously planned from day one? Did Gabe Newell really sit down with a detailed blueprint for this exact democratized renaissance? When you examine Valve's history, their famously flat and iterative corporate culture, it doesn't scream micromanaged master plan. They're known for experimentation, for letting ideas breathe, sometimes to the point of projects famously languishing in Valve time. It's far more plausible that while they initiated the breaking with strategic intent to solve their own distribution problems and gain independence, the full extent of the creative explosion that followed was an emergent property. They built a robust enough platform, opened enough doors, and then crucially stepped back enough to let the community and the market shape much of what Steam became. Think about it. Did they foresee the sheer scale of the indie boom their platform would enable? Did they meticulously design the intricacies of the Steam Workshop economies or the way early access would fundamentally alter developer-player relationships for thousands of games? Perhaps in broad strokes, but the specific, vibrant, often chaotic reality? That feels more like the result of creating fertile ground and then watching, with a degree of calculated allowance, as 1,000 unexpected flowers bloomed. And it's this act of breaking, this initial demolition, that paved the way for such an organic and sprawling creative renaissance that truly defines Steam's enduring legacy and its most significant if perhaps partially accidental, masterpiece. The true accomplishment then isn't necessarily in the deliberate top-down design of every single aspect of this new world. Instead, it's in the profound, almost subversive wisdom of building a system so open, so flexible, and so empowering at its core that it could not only withstand but actively thrive in this unforeseen, user-driven, emergent evolution. It's the art of enabling a revolution you don't fully control. So Steam's true artistry was in its creative destruction, a necessary breaking of old forms to build a new world for PC gaming. But this act of challenging and redefining isn't limited to platforms. What if our very understanding of what constitutes a real game is built on equally shaky, outdated foundations that need a similar demolition? You might think you know what separates a real game from something else, but if you're ready to question that and truly deepen your understanding of the games you play, then you cannot afford to miss this next video. Click here to watch it next. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.